Welcome to the Google Apps Script Slides Service section. We're going to be introducing you and covering everything to do with Google Slides and the SlidesApp class. So this service allows you to create, access, modify Google Slides. It also has all of the features of the slide service, so you can construct slides, you can remove slides, you can add various elements into the slide, manipulate those elements, set backgrounds, set text, and also select from the layout and selecting different layouts that you can apply to the various slides within the project. There's also how to create and open a slide. So using a standalone script, selecting the slide object file and interacting with the contents of that file. There's also with a bound script, how you can update the slides, add to the UI menu and create and select the active presentation, including adding in different slide menus, connecting the functionality directly to what's contained within the functions of the Google Apps script. There are also included in this section several coding projects, and these are again little mini projects that help isolate and illustrate some of the cool functionality that is contained within the Google Slides and some of the code that you can use and repurpose within your own projects. So adding in a button within the UI menu to remove a slide from the slide presentation. So whatever the active slide is, selecting that active slide and adding a button that's going to remove that slide. This project where we're going to be using data from the spreadsheet and listing out and constructing the contents of the slides. So we're going to be generating a slide presentation from contents contained within the spreadsheet rows. How you can update the background color, the text style, the text position of the text boxes in the slide presentations. Also how you can insert drive images using the UI and directly drop images into the slide presentations directly. Selecting the layouts, selecting the master layouts, updating the various shapes, and also reducing the shapes source code within the Google Apps script. There's a lot you can do with slides, and we're going to be covering some of it and the most important parts and the commonly used aspects of slides in the upcoming lessons. In this lesson, we're going to be creating a standalone script where we're going to be connecting to the Google Slides and creating some Google Slides. I'm over at the website script.google.com/home/start, and from here, from the menu, creating a new project. So that's going to open up the script editor. And then within the script editor, we're going to be starting to write our script. So we're going to create a basic function, and let's update this function to be make slides and give it a name. Also the project, the name. And I'll just call it SlidesApp tester. And so let's go ahead and create a slides presentation. So slides and using the Slides app. Got all of the options here, and the one that we want to use, this is one that we've used before for some of the other apps where we just create and giving it a name. And I'll give it a name of new name, and then within the log, let's output what we've got for slides. So go ahead and run the function, and it's going to ask us for permissions since brand new app script, and it's making a connection with the app script to requiring new permissions. And just like the other apps that we've created, they come with an ID, so it's going to have a unique ID that we can also use in order to identify it. So let's select the account that we want to run the script from under Advanced, and you can learn more about the unverified apps and more information about the apps in general. There's also for your Google account, so if you ever want to remove out any of the permissions that you've set, you can go to myaccount.google.com/permissions or click the link here, and that will allow you to see a list of all of the apps that you've provided permissions for, and that way you can select and you can remove them if needed. So going over to the drive, it's going to create the new slide on the default directory for the Google Drive. So that's the slide that we've just created. So every slide presentation, just as the other Google Apps services, we can get an ID value for it in order to connect to the individual product. So we can also select the slide. So select slides. And within the selection, all we need is the ID in order to identify it. So let's select the slide. So using the same const and slides, using SlidesApp, and open by ID, and then we identify it with the ID value. Let's create another variable to hold the ID that we've just copied and pasted. And then within the log, let's output whatever we've got the value for slides. And you can also get things like you can get the name of the slides, and you can also set names of them as well. So let's run the selection of the slides. So there we've got the slide, and we can see the name of the slide being output within the log. So go ahead, try it out, create a slide, and then select that slide by ID and get its name and output it within the logger. And you're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson. So within the Slides app, there's also an option within the slides to use a bound script. So we saw this before within the docs and within the sheets. And under tools, under the tools menu, if you open up the slide that you want to add the bound script to, you can select the script editor. And that's going to open up the editing interface. And this way we can interact and we can update the current slide project, and we can get the active slide project. So there's a number of ways that we saw we can use with the standalone and with the slides, and also within the slides, within the bound script, that's where also we can select active projects as well. And I'll just call it SlidesApp 2. And now this is going to be a bound script within the slides, and I'll just call it add a slide. So we're going to add a slide within the slides and select the Slides app service. And then from here, we can get the active presentation. So this is going to select that active presentation object. Let's log that out into the console. So logger, log, and log out our slides object that we've just selected. So let's run. And this is going to return back the current active slide presentation. And we do need to accept permissions once again because we're interacting with the slide using the app script. So now that we've got the presentation object, we can interact with the presentation using the presentation class. So let's, and this is referencing the entire presentation. So this is where you could add additional viewers and editors to your project. So if you want it to take the slides, and actually let me rename this. So this is actually the whole presentation, and I'll just give it a name of present slide. And then within the present slide, we have an option to add editors, add viewers, so we can update those. So let's add an editor, and this just expects a string value when we're adding the editor. So save. So that's just another email address that I have. So we can add that user as an editor. So now if I go to share, it's going to be shared with that person, with that user that we've just added. Also within the present slide, within the presentation, we can add viewers. We can also append a slide object to it. So let's add in another slide object to it. And for the append slide, adding in the new slide object, we should be able to set the different slide layouts. So let's also set a object for slide, and then we'll return that back into the log. And then after, I'll show you how you can select a layout for the slide that you're appending. So let's run. So now it's created a it's selected the presentation object. From the presentation object, we can generate a new slide. So this is just using whatever the default layout is. You can also specify the layouts. So within the presentation, you can select the layouts that you have. And let's do that before we create the slide. And then we can add in a specific layout as well. So selecting all of the layouts. And this is getting all of the layouts within the presentation object, get the layouts, and returning back a list of all of the available layouts. So we can loop through those using for each, and then we can see which layout we've got and which one we want to use. So layout, And because this is an array, we can assign a particular layout to the slide that we're appending using the array index value. So for now, let's log out each one of the layouts as we loop through the layout object. And it's actually going to add another slide. So see, we've got a number of layouts, and these are just the default layouts. And for the layouts themselves, we can get the layout name and save that. So let's run that one more time. And this time we're going to be outputting the layout name. So you can update the layouts as well. So you see these are all the named layouts. Let's go back into the slides presentation. And under edit master, so you've got a listing of all the layouts when you apply a layout. So this is what you can do to the slide where you can apply the various layouts, and these are all the layouts by name, and they're also corresponding here that we've got the names, so we can select those by name as well when we're applying them. And also when you're changing and when you're editing the master, you're going to see all of the different layouts. So this is the main master layout within this particular slides presentation, and each one of these layouts, we've got an option to rename it here within the slides dashboard, and we can also select each one of these. So we can make updates to them with the script as well. And as well, we can select a particular layout that we want to use. So let's make a selection and select this layout. So this is one, it's called section title, and let's select the main point as the layout that we want to use. So selecting the index value, and within the logger log, let's log out the index value. So that way we can find out what the index value of the layout that we want to use, and then we're going to apply the layout to the slide that we just created. So it's the main point has an index value of 6. So now that we know that, we can select from the layouts object array. And when we're appending a slide, we can select it by its index value, and that's going to add the new slide with whatever index value. And then also, just to distinguish the slide, we can select the background object of the slide and set a value. So if we want to set a particular color, we can set a fill color for the background of the slide. So this is expecting a hex value. So this is just so that we can distinguish it from the other slides within the presentation, because we've created a few of them. So save and hit add a slide. And so now we're adding a slide, so it's this green color slide, and we see that the structure is the main point structure. So we can select the slide layout, we can update some of the slide properties individually, and doing all of this with script. So coming up next, I'll show you some more stuff that you can do with slides. So go ahead, try it out and access your presentation. You can also use a standalone script and access it by ID. And I'll give you a quick example of it within the standalone script as well before we conclude this lesson. So making another function, new slide, and selecting it by ID. So we'll grab the slides object. Let's use the logger log to log out the slides object to see what type of class that we have, and run the new slides. So we've got the presentation object. So that's the same thing that we had here when we opened up the slides and we got the presentation. So now that we've selected and we've got the presentation, we can access it. So this actually, if we rename the current slides to presentation slide, we've got the same object. We've got the same presentation object class. So we can select and we can just reuse the same code that we had here earlier. And I don't think we need to add the user, but we can loop through the layouts, and then we can update and add a layout. Let's update the color for this and save. So now this is going to add another slide to our presentation using the ID, so using a standalone script as opposed to using the bound script. And run the new slide. So it lists out all of the slides in the layout, and it added in a brand new slide. This time the color was red. So that's how you can use either a bound script or a standalone script, access your presentation class, and once you've got your presentation, then you can interact with the layouts, and also you can create new slides. Let's select the slides within the current presentation, and we'll make some updates to the slides. So in the last lesson, we saw how we can generate some slides. We've got 7 slides to work with, and we want to loop through all of the slides. So let's just call this update slides function. And first we want to select the presentation. So selecting the SlidesApp and get the active presentation. And within the active presentation, then we can loop through and we can get all of the slides that are available within the presentation. So just as we saw, we can get the layouts. We'll loop through the layouts. We can get all of the slides as an array as well. So within the log, we can output the slides, and this is going to be within an array format. So let's see what that looks like within the logs. So we've got all of the different slide classes, so all of the 7 slides that we have are represented there. So that means that we can use the for each and loop through them and get each individual slide object, and that way we can work with those slide objects. So within the logger log, we can get the slide object, and within the slide object we can get the background object, we can get the color scheme, groups, images, layouts, get lines, gets notes. So there's all this information that we can get from it, get the different shapes. And with the presentations, there's quite a bit that you can do. And there's also a really easy way just to duplicate slide presentations. So we'll show you a little bit more on that as well, that you can duplicate a slide and then update and use it and create brand new slides from that. So let's go ahead and insert a text box. And that's going to return back a text object. So just set up a variable to hold that information. And I'll unwrap it from the log. And within the logger log, let's see what we've got for the class for the new insert text box. And this requires a string parameter, so we need to have some type of text that we want to insert into it. So let's use the index value and create, I'll call it my text, and use the backticks, so the template literals. So this way we can use the index value and create some text to insert into the text box. Is slide number, and we'll use the index value to indicate the number, but we need to add 1 to it. So add 1 to the index value, and then we'll use this as the text that we're going to insert within the text box. So let's run through and do an update of the slides. So now all of our slides are numbered at the top. And it's just added in just a default text box at the top. So for the text box as well, we can update the position of those text boxes. So now that we've selected the slides and we're looping through them, we want to select that text box object within the slides. So as we loop through and see if we can make some updates to that text in the text box. So as we loop through each one of the slides, we're going to return back the slide and update slides text. So we have a different function name. Save that. And now from the drop down, run the update slides text. So that's again going to return back all of the slide objects. So we want to select the text. And using the slide object, get page elements. So it's going to return back all of the page elements. And actually, let's give this a different name. So I'll call it Ls. And then within the slide, we'll list out the Ls object so that we can see which class we're working with. And then from the class, we're going to have different opportunities there to loop through all of them, so we can do a for each on all of them as well. So save and run the update slides. So we've got a bunch of page elements. So we've got the first one, we've got 3 page elements, and then the other ones we just have 1, 1, 1, and then 2 page elements here. So we've got a number of different page elements. So we want to select these page elements. So again, creating a loop using for each, and this is going to be each one of the elements individually. And within the log, let's look at the element and run through. So this is going to get back the page element separately. And within the page elements class, you can check out what you can select from the page element. So there's you can select the page element content as a group, an image, a line, a shape, a table, video. So you can have all kinds of different content. You can also get the title of it as well. So let's return back the content of the element. And I'll give it a value of val2. And for the element, we're going to get as shape. And so now it's going to return back the element object as a shape. And that also gives us an opportunity to get the text that's contained within it. So actually, let's get the text here within the log. And if we can get the shape and we can get the text, that means that we can also set the text. So let's see what happens. So run through. And we've got what's called a text range. From the text range, that means that we can select the text content and update it. So we've got it as text. So we've got the get text and setting up the text range. We logged out the text range, but we want to get the text range. And once we've got the text range as a object, then that means that we can interact with it. So we can take the text range and we can set the text within the text range, and we can do something like updated. And let's track through. We've got the index here at the top. So let's also just update our text. And I'll just add the index to there to the end. So let's see what happens. So let's loop through, and we're actually going to update all of the text. So this is going to update quite a bit of the elements, and then we can also fine tune it to get the specific text. So this is just an example that we're selecting all of the elements. So we're going to update the text and everything. So let's make a run of this, and we've got updated text. So there's the 3 element areas. These ones just had 1 because we were just creating these. These ones had 2 within the layout. So we've updated all of the text areas with the values that we've set, and as we're looping through and we're selecting them. There's also, once you've got the text range, there's a number of options. So you can set things. You can get it as a string value as well. You can get the links that are contained. You can get the length. You can get the list of paragraphs. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of options there for what could be set there. We can also specify the text style and selecting a list style as well. So for the text style, we can specify text style, and I'm going to log this actually out into the log first. And let's run through this one more time, do all of the updates. And we've got the text style class being returned back. And within the text style class, we can get the font family, and we can also set the font family. So let's create another variable object here for text style class. And within the slides, there's quite a lot of different classes to use, and it is a very complex service. The SlidesApp is a fairly complex service. So grabbing the text style class, and now let's make some updates to the text style. So we can get the, and that's actually going to be different methods. So we can get the font size, we can get the font weight, we can get the background color, and then we can also set the background color, set the font family, set the font size. So how about we set the background color of just the text object. So this is requiring 1 to 3 arguments for the setting of the background color. So we can set 1 to 3 arguments, and it's expecting that we're setting an RGB, so red, green, and blue color values. So these are expected integer values. I'm not sure what color that's going to turn out to be, but we're going to be setting the text background color. And actually, before we do that, we can also do this as a random value as well. So let's return back. And just if we want to generate a random hex, we can generate these this way, where we run the function and then we return back using math floor and then math random times 255. So we return that back, and then we can update these so that we're going to have random colors. So this is just going to return back the integer values. And I got one more extra bracket there. So let's save and let's see what happens. So we're setting some random background colors to the text within the page elements. So run that. And that gives us random background colors. And of course, you can update the text, and just as you would within the dashboard here within the slides, you've got a lot of options for the text once you select it. So there's the different text fonts, different sizes, bold, italic. You can set the text color. The background is the one that we just set. And there's really a lot of stuff that you can do with this. So go ahead, try it out, select those page elements, and then make some updates of those page elements. And you can be ready to move on to the next lesson. This lesson, we're going to be using a bound script and adding to the UI menu of your slides. And this is one of the options when you do have a bound script. And we saw this before with the sheets as well as within the docs, that you're able to add to the UI menu. So let's select the onOpen method, and this is the one that's going to run by default whenever your slides file opens up, and selecting the UI object using the SlidesApp and then get the UI. So that's going to return back the UI object, and then within the UI we've got the options where we can create a menu. So this gives you an opportunity to add to the menu, so you can add items and run various scripts. So add slide is going to be one of them, and these are expected as string values. So just add it in as a string value, and then also so it requires a caption, and then as well it requires the function that's going to run. So I'll just call it as slide as well. So that will be the function that's going to run. And you can add a number of items to the menu, and then once you've finished updating and creating your UI list, then that's where you could add to the UI. So it'll add all the items to the UI. And this will automatically run when you refresh the page. You can also run it manually, so running the onOpen, and that's going to add to the UI menu. So there's a new UI button, add slide. So if we wanted to add a brand new slide to our presentation, we can do that within the UI menu. So add slide. And this will, whatever the selected slide is, we're going to get that slide and we're going to duplicate it, and then we'll add it as a new slide to the end. So that's what our function will do. So let's get the presentation using the SlidesApp, get the active presentation, And within the presentation, we want to get whatever the current slide is. So presentation, or actually let's just call this current slide. And for the presentation, we have a number of options. We can get the slide by ID. We can get all of the slides. We can get the selection. And we'll see what this gets returned back within the log, which class gets returned back. And because slides does have a lot of different classes, use the logger in order to log out and see what the object class is. So let's go ahead and run the add slide. So now we've got a selection. And when we go into the selection class, you can see the different options that we have for selection. So selection allows us to get the user's selection in active presentation. So whatever's been currently selected, we can get the current page, we can get the selection type as well from the selection. We can also get the text range. So let's return back and get the current page. And under the current slide, we're getting the value for current page, and this will return back whatever the current page is. And then again, we'll check to see what class we've got at this point. So now we've got a page class, and then within the page class, so they all have their different methods for each class. So now that we've got a page class, this is where we can interact with the content. So each one of those are pages. We can insert an image, we can insert some text, and we can remove it as well. So if we want to get the current page as a slide, and if we use the slide object, then that means that we can select it as a slide and we can duplicate it. So that's what we need to do. We need to create a brand new slide object. So let's move it up to the slide class, and we can call it current slide, or I already have a current slide. So that will be, I'll just call it my slide. So it's getting the current page object, and we're getting it as a slide object. So that will mean that we've got it as a slide object, and that will also allow us to duplicate it. So let's run the add slide again. And now we've got a slide class, and that's the one that we want to duplicate. So if we use the my slide and we duplicate it, that's going to create a duplicate of the current slide, that whatever you're on whenever you press the UI menu button. So let's see what gets returned back there. So now we've got a brand new slide, and it's actually just added in a brand new slide. So by default, it adds in a new slide. So let's see what happens. So add slide, and it's duplicating the current slide and adding it in. And before we add it in, so within that new slide, we can select the new slide object and insert a text box. And the text box can say new one. And with the old one, so where we've got the current slide, we can select it and we can add in old one. So we can distinguish between the two slides. So save it, and let's go out and see what happens. So we've got this slide, so we've got whatever the active slide is. So let's select updated 3 and hit add slide, and let's see what happens. So it updated, added in a new text box that says old one, and it created a new one that has the content of the old one because we added in the old one value before we duplicated it. So that's why we ended up with that. So if we wanted to have them separate, we can separate it out like that, because we got to run the functions at the same time, and we got to run it before we duplicate it, because whatever content we've duplicated, then at that point it's going to be sitting within there. So for the text box itself, let's set and grab those text boxes, because right now there's one on top of the other. So ideally we don't want to have that issue where we've got the text boxes one on top of the other. So we can set the value from the left side, and this is expecting a number value that's going to be the horizontal position of points measured from the upper left corner of the page when the element has no rotation. So let's add in a value here, and also we'll do the same thing for val2 and run. Let's see what happens. So now when we select it, and actually let's grab this one here and we'll run it using the UI menu. So now when we duplicate it, we've set a new position for the text box, so they're not going to be overlapping the previous ones. So go ahead, try it out, add in the option to add new slides by interacting with the UI menu. In this lesson, we're going to be updating the UI menu. So let's select one and showing how we can add an image. So whatever the current slide is, we'll add an image, and we'll run a function called add image. And actually we can get rid of this one here. So let's create the function add image. And so what this function will do is this is going to add an image to the slides. So let's get the active presentation, and we want to get the slide, the selected slide. So getting the slide object, SlidesApp, get active presentation. And then we also want to get selection, get the current page, and as slide. So that's going to return back the whatever the current slide is that we're on. And that's quite a few of the methods strung together in order to get the slide object. And let's just also make sure that we do have the slide object, so we can get the slide. And within the slide object, we can get the object ID if we want. And we can also identify it by the ID if we needed to. So let's just make sure that we do have the right slide object. Run the onOpen to add the add image to the UI. And then now let's run the add image and just make sure we've got the slide object. So once we have the slide object, we can add an image into the slide. So we need to select our image object. So in order to get the image, we can use the Drive app, and we can get the file by ID. And let's select the file where we've got an image. So this file is the image that we're going to use. So under the share, and when you copy the link, that will provide the ID of the file, and then that way we can set up the ID and then use that within our script. So open file by ID, so selecting the file ID, and then within the slide we can insert an image. So we've got a number of options there, insert image, and we insert the image object that we've got from the drive. So let's see how this works. So run, and we're going to have to accept permissions because we're using the Drive app class, and provide the permissions to interact with the drive. And there's our image inserted into the slide. So once it completes, so now we can go to any page. We can select here, we can add an image and pick up the image from our drive, and it's going to drop the image directly within the slide, so whatever slide that we're on. And then of course we can move the image around. So if we wanted to as well, we could update, and I'll just create a variable for my image. And then within the log, we can log out my image and see what class we've got there for there. And let's remove those run the add image. And we're seeing what we get returned back for the class. So we did get an image class. So within the image class for slides, we can set it, we can get it as a blob, we can update it, we can set a rotation, set a title, set a width for it. So how about we set some of the properties and values for that image. So my image, and let's set the left position for it. So moving off of the left position, so moving it over 20 pixels or 200 pixels. My image set top position, so that you can move it off the top. We'll do also 200 pixels off the top. My image, and there's quite a lot you can set. So you can set the scale, width, and height. So that's an interesting one that we can resize it. So this is a ratio, so it's expecting a number. And scales the element's width by the specified ratio. So element's width is the width of the bounding box when the element has no rotation. So let's add in the integer value for it. And I'll do a 0.3 for the scale. And then for my image as well, we can set a rotation if we want. We can send it to the back, send it forward. So let's go ahead and we're going to send it to the back. And save. So now let's go back in and try it out and add in an image into whatever our selected slide is. So now it's added the image 200 down, 200 over, and it's scaled the width to 1/3 of the size. We also might want to keep the dimensions the same. We want to scale the height as well to the same. So this way our dimensions are going to be the same. So that way, wherever slide we're on, if we've got an image from our drive that we want to drop in, we can add the button within the UI and then easily have an option to drop that image in anywhere within our slide presentation. So also let's add in one more option here where add item. And in the last lesson, we saw how we can remove or how we can add a slide. Let's just do one where we can remove a slide. So this will run a function, remove a slide. And just as when we're adding the image, we need to get the current slide object as a slide. So let's select what we just did. And once we've got it as a slide object, then we can take the slide object and we can remove it. So let's run the on open to add that option to the menu, and then go over here and go under advanced and hit remove, and that should remove out the selected slide that we're on. And try that one more time. And remove. So it's removing out the slides that we're selecting. And then we also saw how we can add an image, and also how we can select the current slide that is currently selected from the active presentation on the selection. So go ahead and try this out, add it to your project. Hey, in this lesson, we're going to insert some text into the slide. So we'll call it add text and create a function to add text, and we'll just call it add my text. So going within the function, add my text, we run the function whenever the button gets clicked. So we want to select the current slide. So use the SlidesApp, get the active presentation, and within the active presentation we can get the selection, and within the selection get the current page, and then get that current page as a slide, and that will allow us to update the slide. So we've got it within a slide class, and then within the slide class, once we've selected the slide class, we can add a text box, so doing it as a shape. And we saw earlier in our previous lesson that the texts are actually going to be shapes, and then you can get the text that's contained within the shape. So let's try that out, and we'll get the text range. So this is going to be a brand new text range that we're doing. So within the slide object, we can insert a text box, but we can also insert a shape. And then within the shape that we're inserting, So using the Slides app, and then setting the shape type. We want to insert, and there's a number of different shapes, so you can select and you can insert all of these shapes. The shape that we want to insert is going to be a text box, and then we'll populate the content of the text box. There's a lot of different shapes to choose from, and as you can see, you can try these out as well. So I'm going to just keep it as a simple text box, and then we need to have the dimensions of the shape. So where it's inserted from top, we need a number value, width, height, and from the left. Actually, it starts from the left. So where do we want to put it? From the left, 50. From the top, 50. What's the width that we want? So let's do 200 width, and height that we want is 200 width, or 200 high. So that's going to insert a blank text shape. So let's go ahead and we'll add that, and we'll try that out. So creating this, going to clear out that slide completely, and we need to run the on open. So we get the new functions there. So add text. And I did have lowercase there and uppercase. So let me update that and try that one more time. So add text. So it inserted this blank text box, so as a shape. And actually we can also add some other shapes as well. And I'll just call it my shape. And instead of inserting a text box, we'll select some of the other options here, where if we want to insert a sun, how about we insert the sun? And I'm going to position this slightly different. And within the log, let's take a look at what the class is that's being returned back for those various objects. And the reason this is being grayed out is that I'm not using it. I'm not using the variable, so you don't have to assign a variable name if you're never going to use it within the script. So that's why the text editor grays that out. So you might have noticed that as we've been going through the lessons that it's been graying that out. So let's run the add text, and we'll see what type of class the shape is. So it's a shape class. And set up a variable, and take the my shape. And see what options we have. So we can remove it, we can replace with an image, we can scale it, we can send back, send forward, set a description, set a height. So there's so much information that you can do here. We can also set the content alignment. So within the content alignment, we can use the content alignment of the text of the shape. So it's a method for automatically deactivates the text autofit properties and allows us to set an alignment. So selecting the Slides app, and then select the content alignment enum, and then within the content alignment enum we can set it directly within the middle, so we don't have to worry about, and we can reposition where that's located. And I'm also going to be just sending it to the back afterwards. So we've got the shape. We're updating the shape, and we're setting the content alignment. And so we've also got the text range that we can work with. So let's try out this, so that we're adding in this sun shape. And within the text box shape, we can also update the text content. So let's get the text content for the current text box that we've just added in. So from the text range. And actually, let me update this to text shape. And then as we're going to use that, so the text range, so we're going to use the text shape and get the text from the text shape. So this is going to return back text range for us. And we saw earlier as well with the text range that we can take that text range object class and we can update and set some text to it. So now we can take the text range and we can set text within the text range. So let's try this out now. So going back in here, let's click the add text. So it's adding the sun, it's adding some text there that says hello world. And once we have the text range, we can also get a range within that text range. So if, for instance, we want to select a sub-range for it, so this is going to be a sub-range of the text range. So select the text range, and we can specify the range that we want to get. So if we want to get the first 5 characters that are contained within the range of the text, so if we want to return back the hello world, we can select that sub-range. And actually, let's log out the sub-range. And we'll see what type of class that is. So let's delete some of this stuff, dismiss, and run the add my text. And so what's being returned back within the sub-range, it's another text range. So for the text range, the parent is a text range, but also if we select a sub-range, as long as it's a range, we can select different text ranges, and these are all going to function just as regular text ranges. So just as we were setting the text for this, we can update the text as well. So now that this is also a text range, we can set the text, we can insert text into there, and we can also specify, so let's insert some text, and we can insert text at a particular offset. So if we want to place it within the index offset of 3, the start offset of 3, and then add in some additional text within the sub-range. And then we'll log out the contents of the original text range. So take the text range and get the, and actually we'll just log out the text range. So let's run that. And we'll see we get logged out. So what we're doing is we're still getting a text range, and that means that we need to get, so if we want to get the contents of it, now we have to do as string because we have a range within a range. So if we add string, that's going to return back the object as a string value. And much like what we did before where we were getting it as a slide, so forcing into the slide class, we can get the text and force it into a text object. So now we can read the content that's contained within that text area. And you can see we've added it in several times here because we've run the script several times. So there's our new updated text range and our text that we've updated within that text object. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the layouts of our slide. So you can also go into the slide and under Edit Master. That's going to give you a listing of all of the layouts that you have. So currently we have a number of layouts within this slide master structure. And we want to select these layouts and also make some updates to those layouts. So let's use the app script in order to select. And I'll just create a function that's called myLayouts. And then within this function, we're going to select the layouts that we currently have within this slides presentation. So let's get the slide presentation and using the SlidesApp, get the active presentation. And then within the active presentation, we want to get all of the layouts. So create a variable for layouts, and then we'll loop through them. So using the slide presentation object that we just created, we want to get the layouts. And this is going to return back an array. And so for the layouts to loop through them, we can use for each. And then that will return back the layouts as an object that we can then use and update. So let's just make sure that we do have it. So using the log, let's update, let's select the layout. And let me just update it with the arrow. And let's run the function and see what we've got. So we've got a number of layouts here. And from the layouts class, this is where we can get images, we can get content from the layouts. We can also insert content into them. we can insert a shape into them as well. So if, for instance, we want a particular layout, let's go ahead and we're going to insert a shape on the layout. And so you can loop through the layouts, see all of the layouts. The easiest way to update and work with the layouts is within the presentation, going under the Edit Master, and that's going to list out all of the layouts that you have to work with. And this is just the same list that we have here. And within the master presentation, so if we want to get the master of a layout, so let's set up a variable, and this is going to return back the layout object, and we're going to get the master. So it's going to bring us into the master class. Let's output that into the log so that we can see what class we're working with. I'll comment out the other log, and then as we run through the layouts, we're returning it back as a master class. And within the master class, then we can also update the layouts. We can remove the page as well. We can insert shapes. So how about within the master of the layout, we go ahead and we insert a shape. And so when you insert it into the master, that's going to apply it to all of the layouts. So let's select the master and insert some content. So let's say, for instance, we want to insert a text box. We can insert a text box, and this is requiring a string value. And then if we want to select that text box that we've just inserted, we can assign a variable to it. So let's add in the text box, and I'll add in the layout so that we can identify them with the text box using the index value +1. Or actually, we'll just start it out with the index value. So the index is going to start at 0. And then let's log out the contents of text box and see what type of class that we have now. So loop through the layouts and all of the text boxes. So this is just a regular shape class. So if you go into shape, it's going to give you a listing of all the methods that you have available for the shape. So you can set the rotation, set the scale, and so on. Also the content alignment. So how about we align the text boxes? So take the text box and we'll just set some properties to it. And that should be uppercase. And we'll set the content alignment for this object. And the content alignment we can get from the SlidesApp and from the enum content alignment, and let's set that to the middle. And then also for text box, we can set the send to the back if we want. So let's add that in as well, that will send it to the back of the other text boxes. And then also for text box, we'll set a title for it, and then within the title, and we'll just type in text box into the title. So we're going to be updating the master layouts, and all of them we're going to be adding in a new text box. So let's see what happens. Let's run it. And now within all of them, we've added in the text box into the master. And when you add it into the master, it automatically gets added into the presentations that are using the master. We can go back to edit the master. And the reason we have it twice is that we've added it twice. So it looks like we do need to get the shapes from the page and then remove some of them. So commenting out where we're inserting, and we can also create a new function for that. So let's get the shapes from this page, and then we'll update those shapes. So this is going to provide us a listing of all of the shapes currently on the page. And then for the shapes, we'll loop through each one of them and then return back the shape. And we can also make updates to it. So within the shape, and for now we'll just log out the shape, and we can get the text that's contained within the shape. So that will help us determine which shape we might want to remove. So let's run through that one more time. So it's returning back all of the text ranges. So get it as string if we want to see the contents of that current shape text. So if it starts with a layout number, we want to remove that shape. So let's have a condition. So setting up a variable and getting the shape text, and we saw we can get it as a string. So we want to check the shape text, and within the logger log, take the shape text, and we'll see if it includes the value of a layout. So those are the ones that we just added, and if it does, then we want to remove it. So we can run this, and this should be returning back a Boolean value. And if this is true, and I'll give it a variable name of boo. So if boo is true, that means that this is one of the new ones that we just added the text to, and we want to get rid of these shapes. So take the shape, and we're just going to remove the shape. So that should clean up our master from the text that we've just added in. So let's run that. And now when we go back out here, we see that the master has removed out those text areas. And also when we go back out to the presentation, we see that it's been removed. So we removed out all of those excess shapes, and there's quite a bit that is running through. So this is one way that you can update the master, and if you do make any mistakes, then you have to dig down and look at all of the different shape objects, and then once you select the shape and you find the one that you want, then you could check to see if it has a particular string or a particular text value that's contained within it by using the includes, and if it does include it, then you can take action on it, and in this case I was just removing out the shapes. So go ahead and try it out, and as you can see, there's quite a bit that you can do with the layouts and as you loop through the layouts. And one of the easiest ways is to update the layouts visually. So I usually would prefer to go into the presentation itself, add to the layout, update the layout as needed, instead of going through and doing it with scripts. But the option is there, and there is quite a bit that you can do with the scripts. Just make sure that you do select the right class, and then within each class it's got its own set of methods that you can apply to your presentation. For this mini project, we're going to be generating a slide presentation using data within a spreadsheet. So we've selected a layout that has a title and a subtitle, and we're going to be populating those with the data from this spreadsheet. So you can go ahead and create a spreadsheet, and also I'm going to be dropping it into a particular folder so that when we generate these slides, they're all sitting within a folder. You can do that as well. So go into your drive, create a brand new folder, go into your sheets and create a brand new sheet, and then populate some content that's going to match with what the layout is. And we're just using the default layouts. So the first default layout that we're using has a title and a subtitle. And when we run the script, it's called the slide maker, and go into our folder that we generated the slides and open up the slide presentation, we can see that we've just generated this nice colorful presentation, and that was coming from the content within the spreadsheet. So that's the project that we are going to be creating in this lesson and the next lesson. We're going to be using the standalone application. So we already had the connection to the drive last time within this. So we're not going to be asked for permissions again. If you are creating a new one, then you will be asked for permissions. So let's create some functions, and we'll create one that's called slide maker. So this is going to create the new slide presentations, and it's going to create the slides. So this is going to be the main slide presentation, and that will be our presentation. So using the SlidesApp and then create, we're going to create and use a string value of slides. And if you want this to be unique, we can generate a unique string value using a date object. So let me show you how that can work as well. and I'll just give it an ID, so my ID, and then we'll use the date object, and this is going to be using the JavaScript date object. There's a number of ways to generate some unique string values, so I'm going to turn the date object into an ISO string value, and then that we're going to use JavaScript slice and slice the first 10 characters from it, and then we'll return back the value of my date, and that actually should be return. So with the my ID, that will allow us to generate a unique name for the presentation that we're creating. And we can try it out, so do run. And this is just going to create the presentation on the drive as a default. So it's generating it according to the date, and then just taking the first part of the date as it's generating the slide presentation. So that's going to give us a more meaningful name other than if we're just creating slides. So we want to get the ID from the slide presentation, and we want to place it within a particular folder. So let's create a folder, and we'll call it Slides Created. And within the Slides Created folder, we need to select the ID, because we want to move to that ID from that particular presentation and move that presentation into the folder. So let's get the ID of the presentation. So just call it press ID. And when we create the presentation, we can get the ID of the presentation that we just created. So that's going to give us an ID that we can interact with on the drive. And folder ID. So that's the one that we just created, the brand new folder. And we're going to drop all of our newly created presentations into that folder. So we need to get the file, and using the drive app, let's get the file by ID. And that's the presentation that we just created. So this is the new one that was just generated. And then we want to take that file and we want to add it and remove it into the folder. So let's use the drive app and get folder by ID, folder by ID. So we can use the folder ID here. And I'm not assigning a variable to this because we're not going to need this. We're just moving the file. So we're adding the file. And you can of course add editors if you need to as well. And the file that we're adding is going to be the file that we just created. So let's see how that works. So now it should be, we need to of course accept permissions again within the drive app, because now we're moving the file within the drive. And so now we should be adding in the files into this newly created folder. So let's see what happened. And there's our file in the folder. So that one was the one that we previously created, so I'll just delete that. So we also want to use a spreadsheet in order to generate the slides. So let's go into the drive and we'll create a spreadsheet in here, and we'll also give this one an ID. So just create a new spreadsheet. This is going to be just a very basic one where we're going to have some content that we want to list within each one of the slides. So for each row, we're going to create a new slide. And I'll call it Slide Maker. And we can have it name the slide output. So if we want for the heading. And also when you are creating these, check out the different default layouts that you have within the slide. So for instance, if we want to put a title and then a subtitle, so we'll just select this slide layout as the default. When we create the new slides, they're all going to have the same default master layout, and we'll just select the first one. So we have option for 2. So we've got a title essentially. So I'm just putting headings in here, and then a subtitle. And maybe this can say welcome 1, my slides, slide 1. And then I'll increase these. And of course, you probably are going to want to have some real content in these. So this is just so we have some distinct content for the heading, as the heading title, as well as the subtitle. And we're going to be using the default layout and the first layout within the default layout. So next we need to connect to the sheet in order to get the sheet data. So let's select the sheet, and that's the sheet that we just created. So using the spreadsheet app, open by ID, and this is where we can specify the ID. So this is going to be our sheet ID. That's the ID that we're using. Let's grab the spreadsheet ID from the URL, get the ID, and then open the spreadsheet by ID. And we'll get sheet by name, and the name of the sheet, I believe we had it as output. Let me double check that. Yeah, we had it as output. So it's going to return back the sheet object, and that way we can also write to the sheet. So let's get the data that's contained within the sheet, and that we can get from the sheet object and get data range. So it's going to return back all of the content that we have within the sheet. And also let's get the values so that we get an array. And we want to slice out the content for the slides separately from the headings. So that's where we can use slice in order to slice out the heading information. So this is just going to slice the first row out. And so now we're going to have, or we should be returning back these 15 rows of content. Let's log out whatever the content of data, and maybe we can do data length. So that will give us an idea of how much content is there. And I'm going to separate this so we don't always have to keep creating brand new slides. And data, sheet, and then let's get the data sheet separately. So run this function and just review the permissions, accept the permissions, because again we're adding in and using the spreadsheet app class. So it's going to require some different permissions, and we've got the 15 rows of content, and you can also just output the data if you want as well, just to make sure that we do have the data. So all of the data is now present, and we can call to this function to get the data that we need. So we've got the one that makes the slide, and then once we have the slide data, we want to create a slide, and we want to use the slide layouts. So let's next select the layout. So use select my layout, and then this we can use the presentation. And temporarily, I'm going to just use this ID so that we make sure that we're selecting the right slide. So we need to get all of the slides layouts that we have. And using the Slides app, open by ID, and we'll use the ID value. And we're also going to already have the slides presentation here as we're making it. So we're not going to have to call to it again. So this was just to test and to get the layouts. And here we can get all of the layouts. And maybe I'll just rename this to layouts. And then let's loop through and get the names of the layouts so that we know that, and we'll associate it with the ID value. So to make sure that we've got the right layout that we want to use and that we want to assign to. And then within the logger log, we're going to take the layout get layout name, and then we'll also output the index value. So this is just a function that we can use to get some layout information. So the first one is title, the second one is section header. So let's see what we've got here. So the title slide is going to be the first one that we want to use, and that has an index value of 0. So let's select the layouts, and we're going to use layout 0. So get the layouts, and we already have the slide object. So we just need to get the layouts of the new one that we've just created. And again, by default, is going to use the default layout that we were just using. So that's why we can be sure that the layouts are going to be the same. And we are trying to use this layout because it's got the title and the slide area. So we want to populate that with some content. And we also want to get the data back. So the data that we want to use, and that's coming from the sheet data there. And we'll just, here we'll return back the contents of data. So apply and get sheet data. So return that within a data object. And within the data object, we can then loop through and for each, and I'll just call it row. And this is where we want to create a slide. So every time we loop through, we want to append a new slide to the main presentation. So let's create a variable called new slide, take the presentation and append a slide. So we're adding them within order. And within the append slide, we have the option to set the slide presentation. So taking from the layouts, we're going to select layout with an index value of 0. So we want to select the elements on the page and then update them. So for now, what we'll do is we'll set up and we'll create a background color. So background, so that they're all different. And then we're going to update the content as well. So using math random and then to string method. So it's going to turn the math random value to string. And then we can use the JavaScript string methods where we can select a substring and -6. So this will give us 6-character hexadecimal value that's going to be used for the random color. And then for the new slide, we can get the background object, and then we can set the fill color of the background using our newly generated random background color. And you can also set an alpha value. So I'm going to set an alpha value to 0.3. So what's going to happen now is we're going to generate. So let's go through this and we'll run through what the function is going to do. So for the slide maker function, we're creating a new slide and generating an ID, which is going to be associated with the date. We're getting the ID value of the presentation that we just created. We're selecting our folder that we want to drop it into. We're using drive app to get the file by ID. So we'd have the ID over here. And then we're using that file and we're dropping it into the folder. Over here, we're getting all of the layouts of the slides that we just created. We're getting the data from the spreadsheet. We're looping through the data that we have from the spreadsheet. We're creating a new slide by appending the slides presentation with a selected layout, and we're using the layout with the index value of 0. We're generating a random background value, and then we're selecting that new slide that we created, and we're filling the background value. So we haven't gotten to any of the text data yet, so I do want to try this and just see if it's running, accept any permissions that we have to run. And actually I need to run the slide maker function. And so what happened now is it should have generated a brand new slides presentation with 15 additional slides with the background colors that were generated. So next, we just need to populate the content of the slides, and we'll do that in part 2 of this exercise. So go ahead and create the slides, move it into a folder if you want. Also create and select the layout that you want to use, and you can also add the random background color if you want, and get the data from your spreadsheet, set up some data in a spreadsheet, get that data, and make sure that the cells are going to align with what we've got within the default slide layout, and you're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson. We're going to wrap up this application. So this lesson, we're going to be concluding our build of our slide presentation generated from content within a sheet. And in the last lesson, we saw how we can create the slides and drop it into the folder. I'm going to delete these and also close that one. So we're using the slides, we're generating a slide presentation, and then we're updating some of the content within each one of the slides, and that is coming from how many rows we have here within the spreadsheet. So now let's go back into the application where we left off. So where we're setting the background as we're looping through each piece of data that's contained within the spreadsheet, and we're appending a new slide and using the selected background layout. Let's now select the page elements. So page elements. And for the page elements of the slide, we need to select it from the new slide and get the page elements. So it's going to return back the page element of each one of them. And in this case, we know that there's only going to be 2 because we know from the default that the first one is going to be the title and the second one is the subtitle. So there's actually no need to loop through them, where we're just selecting the page elements. And with the page elements, selecting it by the index value. So the first one is going to be the main title. So we select it as a shape, and selecting it as a shape allows us to get the text. And then the text within the shape, once we've selected it, we can set the text value. And this we can use the row value, and this is also an array. So we've got multiple items there, and we want to get the first item within that row. So that's going to be the title. And then the second one with the index value of 2 is going to be the second one. So let's do a quick function to test out test data so that we can see the data that's coming in. We're going to get the data from the spreadsheet using the same function. And this time we're just going to log out the row details in the log so that we can see the data that's coming in from the row 1 and with an index value of row 2. To make sure it's working before we try to run it and we create a brand new sheet. So run the test data and just see if it's working. So it does look like we're able to get the data back. So welcome 1 and slide 1. So that format does work. So we're setting the text value and setting the second text value. So the second element is going to be the second value that we're setting. And now let's run it and see if we create our slides from the spreadsheet. And run the slide maker function. And we'll go over to the drive, let it run through. So it's presenting all the information that we have from the spreadsheet. And then now let's open up the slides. And we see we've got all of the content, and this content was coming from our spreadsheet, and we've populated and generated the slides presentation. Also the first slide there, we should remove that first slide because we don't have any content in there, or if you want, you can just leave that in. So let's wrap this up and we'll just remove the first slide. So within the function, remove first. We'll pass in, we'll create another test function to simulate this one, and then we can run the function remove first, pass in the slide presentation that we want to remove from, and allow us to remove out the first slide from that presentation. So creating a function, test remove. And usually I do like to take and create these test functions as it does make it easier to run the code and avoid any issues that I might be having. So I want to select the slide presentation. So selecting the presentation using the Slides app, open by ID, and I need the ID of this presentation. I just want to remove out whatever the first slide is. So selecting and create the ID. And open by ID, so we'll open it by ID. And then for the presentation, so we need to list out we can list out the slides. So just do a plural there and take the presentation, get slides. So it's going to get the slides in an array. And we know we want to remove out the first one. So let's run our remove first. And we're going to pass in the presentation object here. And within the remove first, let's just log out the slides just to make sure that we have slides there. And then within here, make sure we pass in the one argument there so that we'll remove the underline for remove first. So let's do a test remove and see what happens. So we list out all of the slides that we have. And let's take the slides with an index value of 0, and then we will just remove that function, remove that slide object. So that removed out the first item. And we can use the same thing here when we get the layouts. We can just remove out whatever the first one is that we have for the layouts. When we get the slides, so let's select and use the function of remove the first one, remove first. And that's going to correspond to the slide app presentation. And we're just going to remove the first one from the slide app presentation. So it looks like we're ready to try this again. So let's run the slide maker and see what happens. So I'll remove out the old one. And now if I open it up, our first slide should be removed. And we've generated all of the slide content, and that's all coming from the spreadsheet. So try it out and also update some of the fields. You can select some of the different slide layouts if you want. You can create your own slide layouts. And generate some slide presentations from your spreadsheets. This is going to be a quick overview of the SlidesApp service and the SlidesApp classes that we've looked at in the previous lessons. So within the Slides app, there's a lot of different methods that are available. So there's a lot of classes, and each one of those classes has a lot of methods as well. So with Slides as well, you can run and create a bound script. So it's just a script and going into the script editor. So that gives you an opportunity to interact with the UI as well as access the live presentation and get the selection. There's also, of course, you can do it with a standalone script, and there are some advantages to doing it within the bound script, so that really gives you an opportunity to interact with selected content and update what you do and what the user can do within their slides. And I'll just give this one a name of test. So we saw that when we create functions, we can set up our slides. So the first parent object is going to be the presentation, and within the presentation we would use the slide app and we can get the active presentation. So that's what we can do for the bound script. And then within the presentation itself, we've got a lot of options. So within the presentation class, you can see the drop down where you can set and you can get layouts, you can get masters, you can get the name of the presentation, and you can work with the notes, so adding notes to the pages, so getting the notes, also setting the name, you can get the URL. So these are all the top level methods that are available within the presentation. So if we were to create and get a new slide, that was another option that we had in creating a slide. So we could use the presentation and then append a slide. And then that slide then is going to be returned back as the slide class. And from there, we've got another set of methods that we can use. So let's run the my function and see what we get back within the execution log. So first at the top level, we get the presentation. And within the presentation object, we need to also accept permissions as we're updating the document now. So let's provide and accept the permissions. So first we get the presentation class, then we've got the slide class, and then each one of these classes, they've got a bunch of methods that you can use. So this, if we want to get the text range, we can select from the slide object, and we can get the page elements. And this will return back a listing of all the page elements. And actually we'll do the text range after. So first we'll do page elements and returning back a listing of all the page elements, and then we'll loop through those. So within the logger log, we got the page elements object, and then within each one of these, so for the page elements, this is returning back an array. So we can use a JavaScript method for each to return back the element object. And when within the element object, we'll list out the elements individually. And then this is where we can select from the element the additional content, such as the text that's contained within it. So getting the element object as a shape, using the as shape, and this allows us to get the text that's contained within it, and we can also then set the text and add some text to that element. So looping through all of the page elements that we just created, and then selecting and updating some text in there. So let's try to run this function. And presentation slides. So we don't have any page elements yet. So if we already had page elements, we don't have any page elements, then we could select them and get the shape and add text. But since we don't have any page elements, we have to insert a page element. So let's take and select from the slides and insert a page element. So within the slide, we're going to insert a text box, and then within the text box, we'll write the word test. So it's going to insert that text box, and then we'll select the page elements, and then we can update those page elements. So we need to have a page element first, and then we can update and get the text range. And let's output the text range of that particular element. Run the function again. So now we've got a page element, and that page element gets returned back within the array. So now that we've created the page element, when we get the page elements, we get it returned back within an array, and we can log out the element object. So we only have the one page element, so we're logging out the element and it's being logged out as a page element. And then also we're getting the text range that's contained within that page element, and we're setting it to test, and I think we already started out with test. So let's make one update to this. So there's our page element that we've set and we've created. And also if we want to insert a text box, so just create a variable for text box, And because we've inserted this text element, we can select it as an object. So that means that we can set where we're positioning it. So we can set the content alignment. So let's set the content alignment to SlidesApp, and then select the content alignment enum, and let's set it to the top. And save and run the function. And that's created a brand new slide. It's updated the words within the slide, updated the shape, text information of the slide. So as long as you've got the class selected, the classes all have different methods. So you can also move between different types of classes. So in this case, when we use the as shape, so we're taking that selected element and getting the text range of the element by selecting it and forcing it to be a shape. And then for the shape, we can get text. We can set the text as well once we get the text from the element. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Always happy to hear from you. And with the Google Slides, there's really a lot of different options and different classes that are available. I do suggest that you try it out within a function like this to experiment and see what different elements and different objects you can select, and then make updates and manipulations to those objects. And also create some test functions in order to... Yeah, and this is really one of those Google Workspace services that has a lot of options. So it is worthwhile to take the time and just create some experiment functions and try the code and run the code in order to make the selections. And also take the project that we've worked on and the source code that we've provided in the earlier lessons and try it out, customize it, and see what you can make happen with SlidesApp and the Slides service.